So this is Huawei's Mate 20 Pro, and it's probably the most feature-packed phone that I've ever reviewed. Okay, so like I talked about in my hands-on, there's probably about 4 things that make this phone stand out from all the rest of the Android phones out right now, so let's focus on those. You pretty much can't talk about the Mate 20 Pro without talking about the cameras, because there's 3 cameras in the back of this phone. You've got a super wide angle camera, a 40 megapixel camera, kind of like we saw in the P20 Pro, and you've got a 3x telephoto camera with optical image stabilization. Now they're placed in this cube-like structure that is definitely going to be really polarizing, but after using it for the past week or so, I've actually come to really like the design. Now the wide angle camera in this phone is great. It doubles as a super macro lens, so you can pretty much just get super close to your object, and it's surprisingly sharp for better or worse. But it's really nice having the option in this phone because that's something you don't really see in that many other phones right now. And like I said before, the main sensor on this phone is 40 megapixels, which means you can get some pretty insane resolution out of this thing. Now, I was really surprised by the color accuracy, and I was really happy with how it reproduced the color, but it did tend to overexpose images quite a bit. Now, if you drop the exposure down just a little bit, you can get some really, really nice imagery out of this thing, and here's a few examples just to show you what this thing can do. The low light mode on this thing is okay. It's not quite as good as something like the Google Pixel 3, but I think that Huawei is expecting you to use the night mode, which kind of uses AI to stabilize a long exposure, and that works really, really well. The third camera is a 3x telephoto lens with optical image stabilization. And obviously, like a telephoto lens is going to be a lot better than something like a software crop, but you can do this thing where it's a 5x zoom with the telephoto and a little bit of a software crop, and that ended up looking really good. If we move around to the front, you're getting a selfie camera that's 24 megapixels, and that's a lot of megapixels for a selfie camera. For some reason though, the images just seem really soft, and I turned off all the beauty modes and skin smoothing modes, but they just ended up still being soft. Oh, also you're probably gonna need to drop the exposure on the selfie camera as well, because it also tends to overexpose. Overall, this thing's just a total beast of a camera system. Well, smartphone, but it's pretty much just a camera system with a really good smartphone attached to it. Okay, so now that we move past the main thing that people are probably gonna wanna know about, we get to the in-screen fingerprint reader. Now I've tested a lot of these fingerprint readers in the past, and they've been pretty bad. So I was surprised when the Huawei Mate 20 Pros was actually pretty good. Now obviously it's not quite as fast as something like Face Unlock or a regular fingerprint reader, but it's pretty quick for what it is, and I only really had a few issues when I touched it with like the side of my finger, but if you just reposition your finger, it gets it pretty quickly. What's nice is you can also use this in-screen fingerprint reader for things like bank payments or password management, and I could see a lot of other manufacturers eventually adopting this as the standard, especially since this one is so good already. The third major feature, and probably the coolest feature in this phone in my opinion, is what Huawei's calling reverse wireless charging, which is exactly what it sounds like it is. You can pretty much just set any other phone on this phone, it'll use the phone's battery to charge that other phone up. And it doesn't have to be a phone either, you can use pretty much anything that has Qi charging in it. The bad news is that it's really slow and pretty inconsistent. So if you leave another phone on this phone for like a few minutes, you might get 1% or so, but it's definitely not nearly as fast as just wireless charging something on a regular Qi pad. It's also kind of inconsistent, so you can set a phone on the device and it'll say it's charging for like half a second, and then it'll drop off and suddenly not be charging anymore. And I'm really hoping that Huawei is going to fix this in a software update, because they told me this software is not final, but they are shipping this phone right now, and if they're shipping it to customers already, I don't really buy that whole software is not final thing. Either way, this is the kind of innovation that I like to see. Just like that in-screen fingerprint reader being 2 generations old and being a lot better than the first generation, I really hope that Huawei improves on this reverse wireless charging concept and it just becomes a baseline in their phones. Number 4, and the last major thing that we talked about in our hands-on with this phone, was the Kirin 980 processor. Huawei says that this processor should significantly increase battery life because of this new big.little.little architecture, and I definitely found that to be the case. I got like 6.5 to 7.5 hours of screen on time out of this phone, and I haven't seen screen on time as good as that since I reviewed the Galaxy Note 9. Now, performance out of this chip is pretty good in general. Obviously, you can't really see a huge differentiation between phone chips nowadays. I did see a little bit of stuttering when launching and multitasking apps here and there, but it happened really infrequently, and you're probably not gonna notice it in everyday use. All right, so now that we're past those big four things, we can start talking about the little things in this phone. I like the design of this phone a lot. It really reminds me of like a Galaxy S9 that's really updated with Huawei's design language, but that does make it really slippery because it's curved on all four sides. Now you can get a case with this phone. It actually comes with a clear one that makes it a little grippier, but clear cases generally degrade over time and end up looking just kind of crappy. So I'd either get a different case or just take the risk and use it as is. I did drop it multiple times and I still don't really see any cracks or scratches on it, so that's a plus, but do that at your own risk. The speakers in this phone sound pretty good, and they actually primarily come out of the USB-C port, which is pretty weird. And you might think that maybe if you're charging your phone, it's gonna be extremely muffled. And while it was a little bit muffled while charging, it's not really that noticeable. And there actually is another speaker in the earpiece, so you're still gonna be able to play music or watch YouTube videos or whatever you do with your sound. Huawei EMUI 9.0 is based on Android Pie, and it's actually pretty good. It's a lot more toned down than it was in the previous version, and while it doesn't ship with things like the app drawer, those are things that you can turn on in the settings. All right, now I kind of hate discussing specs because a lot of phones pretty much run the same at this point, but I'm gonna throw them up on the screen for you guys that wanna see them. The Huawei Mate 20 Pro is available right now, and it starts at 1,050 euros, which is about $1,250 US. And that's a ton of money for a smartphone. But this is also one of the most feature-rich smartphones we've ever seen, so that's kind of the trade-off that you have to make here. Now, while I generally have a pretty hard stance on the phone, especially considering price, I'm probably gonna have to leave this one up to you guys, because even though it's one of the most expensive Android flagships we've seen in a long time, it's also one of the most feature-rich. All I can say is that I do really love this phone. I've gotten photos off of it that I probably couldn't get with pretty much any other Android smartphone right now, and I just love seeing Huawei push the boundaries with all these innovations that they stack into this thing. So please, do let me know in the comment section if you would actually consider buying this thing. At $1,250 US, it's a lot more expensive than a lot of other smartphones, and there are ones that are almost as good for like half the price. But you're just getting all these special innovations that only Huawei has really been able to show off, and I think that's awesome. If you do want to read a lot more about this phone or look at all the little specifics of it, we do have a full written review up on the website. We've also uploaded a lot of the photos in full resolution so you can pixel peep if you want to. I'm gonna go move on to the next phone, but until then, I will see you in the next video.